thanking you for taking your time to partake in this afternoon session. Just some housekeeping rules. Please note that this workshop is being recorded, and all the resources, which include the recording of this workshop as well as the presentation slide, will be shared to your respective Moodle community. Also, please note that if you do have a question for Mrs. Eunice, you are more than welcome to raise your hand. I'll enable all your mics. Therefore, you can just unmute yourself and have your question, or just use the chat box to ask your question. Also note that I'll be sharing an evaluation link with you on the chat toward the end of the workshop. Please do fill that evaluation form. It's less than 5 minutes. It helps us to plan more of the workshop like this, and also for reporting purposes, and also to give back to our facilitators a feedback of the workshop and for the hard work they put in preparing such a workshop. Without any further waste of time, I would like to introduce our facilitator. For today's, our facilitator is Mrs. Eunice Mutava. She is a professional within the occupational health and hygiene space, and she is currently a lecturer at the University of Johannesburg Department of Nursing, where she teaches in the postgraduate occupational health program. She also coordinates and teaches research to the postgraduate students in the department. Mrs. Mutava holds a Bachelor of Science honors in nursing and a postgraduate diploma in occupational health from the University of Zimbabwe, a master's in occupational health and nursing from the University of Witwatersrand, a master of public health in occupation hygiene from the University of Witwatersrand, and an MBA from the Henley Business School at the University of Reading in the United Kingdom. She is presently a PhD candidate in occupational health and hygiene at the Northwest University Occupational Hygiene and Healthy Research Initiative. Mrs. Mutava, thank you for honoring our invite. We thank you for taking your time to facilitate today's workshop. You may proceed with the workshop. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you so much, Nkosi. I really appreciate that. And thank you for also giving me this opportunity to have a talk on research ethics and what they actually mean out there in a country which has got a lot of opportunity for research. Good afternoon, everyone. Let me just share my slides. Okay, I hope everyone can see my slides. And once I'm in slide mode, I won't be able to see any raised hands.
Yes, Mrs. Mutava, we can see your slide. I have here with Dr. Lorenzo. He wants to say something to say, man.
Yes,
hello,
all right.
Apologies for interrupting during the middle of your presentation. We've just had a bit of an issue with another workshop which is running concurrently in research ethics. We want to know, with your permission, if it's fine if a few CBE students join your session as well, if that will be okay with you.
Yes, that's fine. That's fine.
Okay.
Not an
Thank
issue.
you very much. Thank you.
All right. So should I proceed, Nkosi, or wait for them?
I think we can proceed for now. They will join us.
Okay. All right. So welcome to Ethics in Research. And as I already mentioned, South Africa is that state where human dignity, equality, advancement of human rights are respected and promoted and protected, as we all know, by our constitution. But what South Africa actually provides us is with a rich arena for research. And it is because of the research infrastructure, skills, and the expertise which is actually there. right? So today's topic is on ethics that is involved in what research that happens in the different departments. As you have heard from the introduction that was given, I am from the health research arena, but I'm told that there are science and engineering students as well. Now, this slide is more for me than for you to just basically remind me of what each of these specialties actually focus on when we are talking about research. So correct me if I am wrong so that we are on the same page as we proceed. So with health research, because it's my field, it's about improving public health and medical care. For science research, am I correct to say it is about that pursuit of knowledge about the natural and the social world? Am I correct in thinking like that? Because I'm now thinking of studies, say, that conduct clinical trials to test new medical treatments or therapies, or exploring ways to make renewable energy more affordable and accessible. Is that what science research is all about? Anyone from science? Okay, and then in the engineering one, I am seeing it as research that is directed toward the practical application of science to products, to services, or infrastructure. So engineering for me is at that design stage. So they are designing something. So research that I'm thinking will come from such as a space will be things like nanotechnology, high-speed computation, maybe adaptation of communications and defense systems, and any other application for civilian use, or maybe for use by the military, or wherever it is that you are designing such systems. Am I correct to think like that?
Yes, you are.
Okay, all right. So when I completed this presentation, or when I planned it, I was more leaning towards I was more leaning towards health research, or not necessarily health research, but research that involves human participants. So somewhere along the line, let's say for the engineering student, you are planning for the future. So there will be some human participant in the future if it's about design. I don't think your collection of data really requires you to be dealing with a human participant. I'm not sure about that. But anyway, that's why I've got this slide. I want to know, what do you know about ethics in research? What do you know? And what do you think you need to know, and why? What do you know? Nothing, guys, about what ethics is all about? When you hear the word ethics, you think about morals, values? Yes?
What I would just basically say, what I think about ethics, it's about academic integrity. It's about avoiding the do's and don'ts of academia, which with regards to plagiarism and making sure but mostly when it comes to academic ethics, it's mostly plagiarism and getting ethical clearance and making sure you're able to prove to a committee that whatever you are the study you're carrying out doesn't jeopardize any relationship between organization, doesn't disclose, because at times you could get a non-disclosure agreement from your employers or from whoever is giving you the data you're going to use, and that's you must keep it confidential at every time. So ethics is just all about the making sure that you understand the implications of making sure that everything within your research is done ethically free. Thank you.
Okay. All right, thank you. I'm assuming you are from science or engineering. Yes?
Engineering.
Okay, from engineering. Okay, before you actually disappear, what is it that you actually think you need to know? Because you've told me what you know, and it is correct, right? One branch of the ethics that you're going to look at, academic integrity, plagiarism, and we're also going to touch on ethical clearance. And then I'll get to hear what ethical clearance entails in engineering, and then I'll tell you also what it entails when it comes to the health sector or the health specializations. All right. So what do you think you need to know from today? Because you already know about academic integrity, plagiarism, fabrication, manipulation of data. So what do you think you need to know today?
I think, in my own opinion, is that you'll be the one to tell us what we need to know. if I could say it from, okay, why I say that is that I'm like a philosopher coming from more of a management background into engineering, so looking at ethics from that perspective, it's based on the answer I have given, and from an engineering perspective, I want to see, I want to also understand and see how things are done from the health science perspective. So I do not want to I do not want to think. I just want to treat it. I want to treat it as a layman, because if I think means that I am not learning. But if I treat it as a layman, then I am really learning from this particular.
All right, accepted. And I saw from the chat that there's someone who also mentioned issues around plagiarism. So yes, the both of you are correct. So I've decided to put these slides so that we get to understand that aspect of ethics in terms of research integrity. And then there's also the ethics that are involved if you're going to be dealing with human participants or animal participants, right? So from that side of research integrity, so I'm showing you an example of a study that was published, and then after a while, they decided to retract, right? And the retraction was as a result of some misconduct that then came to light, that there was some manipulation of data and wrong reporting of findings. So you are reporting findings in such a manner that you want to really say, I have reached my purpose. You were expecting certain results, but the results did not come out as they are. So you were not honest to report what you actually got, and then you report what you think is the good effect, so to speak. So this is one aspect of research ethics that a student would actually want to have an understanding of. So the research process just doesn't end at you having done your proposal, and then you do your study, you write your dissertation or your thesis, and then it ends there. You're still going to be writing articles so that we advance whatever is known in literature out there. And then there's another one where there was manipulation, right? So they took pictures and then they manipulated the images that were there, right? This is also some form of poor integrity, right? And then there's also socially acceptable practices. So in this case, we have a mother who has got a daughter who has got a melanoma, which is like a cancer, right? So because they wanted to gain a better understanding of the immunity towards that cancer, they decided, okay, we can actually transplant the tumor from that child into the mother who is perfectly fine. And then we are hoping that the production of tumor antibodies might be helpful, or our understanding of the production of such antibodies might be helpful in the treatment of cancer. But then you would find that the daughter then died, and the mother then died as well, 451 days after that transplantation, because they then found out that the cancer itself was metastatic in nature, which means it spreads, right? So yes, these are some of the issues that you get to hear about that. So you might be asked, do you think the researchers in this case were fine to actually do this transplantation of this melanoma into the mother, right? Even though we tell you that she volunteered and she was given all the necessary information related to that transplantation as part of that study, because they wanted to understand something about that treatment, right? So these are some of the things that will make us think about ethics, right, in a different light. So you have got that ethics of integrity. So in this case, we are thinking ethics is about the integrity, but there's also the part where we are dealing with human participants, particularly in the sciences, well, human and animal, particularly in the sciences and the health research. So also there's that need to understand that. So the ethical requirements, really, when we look at them, it's things related to scientific or social value. Hence, those articles that I showed you, where people were then found to be retracting their articles of studies that they have conducted before. So your study must be of must have a good scientific design, right? We also talk about scientific validity, right? Are you measuring what you said you're actually going to measure? And whatever you have, is it going to measure and give us a truthful understanding of what it is that you said you are setting about to measure? Then if we were dealing with humans and we were dealing with records, for instance, or even if we're dealing with the animals, there's also that fair subject selection. Are we fair in selecting the subjects that are going to participate in our study, right? How have you selected them for you to demonstrate that there was indeed fairness or some justice in actually selecting these subjects that are going to participate in your study? And then there's this favorable risk-benefit ratio, right? So you have to look at the risks and the benefits of your study, right? And the ratio that you're going to establish must be where the benefits outweigh the risks for us to actually say, yes, we can clear you to do this particular study. So these are some of the principles that we are going to look, or the aspects of ethics that we are also going to be looking at. But then you also have got issues related, say, to independent review. So you might, in your research journey, be an independent reviewer, or your work is reviewed by someone. So what if that person reviews your work and gets to know that there is this information that is here, which might help me with the study that I'm doing? Can I then take this idea and use it? Even in your case, you could be that reviewer, right? And then you are reviewing someone's work, or it could be somebody that you work with. And then as you are reviewing their work, you then find that there's an aspect in their study which would help you, all right, in your own study. So how do you navigate such waters, right? And then there's also the concept of informed consent and the total respect for enrolled participants. So your subjects, animals, humans, or it could be the documents that you're actually working with. Okay, so the learning outcome that I had, or that I was thinking of, is that when we complete this workshop, you should then be able to demonstrate a knowledge and understanding of the ethical considerations that are followed in research to ensure that the studies are conducted in an ethical and responsible manner, right? So if you are the engineering student, maybe your study is mainly with concerned with design, right? If it's health and sciences, then you're thinking of humans, you're thinking of animals, you're thinking of things like clinical trials, for instance. So think about how you can actually conduct it in an ethical and responsible manner. So the outline that I have got the history, the regulatory structure, research ethics committee, and then we'll also talk about key norms for ethical research with human participants and animals. So as I said at the beginning, when I wrote this, it was mainly to do with research that involves dealing with human participants. But when we get there and it has got nothing to do with your study, you will then be able to say, okay, in my case, it might apply in this manner. Right? So what is it that we mean by ethics? So it's those moral principles that guide your research, or it's a set of moral principles or norms that are used to guide the moral choices of behavior or your relationships with others, right? And then there are ethical stances. So you need to find out where do you stand when it comes to these moral and values, these morals and values. Where do you stand? All right. Are you universalistic versus the deontology, or are you contingent or relativist versus the theology? So in which square would you actually fit in? So if we were in the universalistic and deontological one, we are actually saying that ethical principles should never be broken. So academic integrity, plagiarism, ethical clearance, those ones, they should never be broken. If you break them, breaking them is both morally wrong and damaging to whatever research that we are doing. If we're in the relativistic one, we are now contextualizing it, and we are saying the duties for us to do this, for us to be deemed moral or ethical, are bound by the context itself. It could be a country, it could be a community, it could be a professional group, it could be clients. So if you're in the health sector, maybe it's your HPCSA, or it's the Nursing Council, so that's a professional group, or it's the country, South Africa as a whole, that actually tells us what is considered morally wrong and damaging. And then in the in the theological one, we are saying means do not overlap the ends, but following a universal set of rules or practices can often be relied on to pursue those ends. So we are talking about that rule of utilitarianism. So what we are saying there is that you don't need to say, I can reach an end, but I have to follow a universal set of rules. And then if it is relativistic, we are saying the acts that are there should actually be judged purely on their possible outcomes, where we then say the end justifies the means. Unlike in the universalistic consequentialist kind of stance, right? So find out where you are, and then we say, okay, according to South Africa, this is where we would expect someone to be, depending on the research that they are actually conducting. Now I'm going to go through the history, but this history is probably relevant for research in the health field. Like these codes that are there, like if you saw in these instances, we say there are rules, there are acts, and there are so guidelines, or a set of universal rules. Some of these have been influenced by what has happened in the history. So the first one is our Nuremberg Code, right? So this code looks at or it's about what happened in World War II, right? Where the Nazis were conducting their studies, right? So they conducted their studies, and it violated so many ethical principles, such that they then developed some guidelines to tell us how we are supposed to proceed if we were to be dealing with human participants, or if we were going to be doing studies that have got a potential to cause harm to the participants that we have selected to participate in our study. We also have got this Helsinki Declaration. So in this one, it's the World Medical Association, all right, that developed some ethical guidelines for research that involves human subjects. So with the Helsinki Declaration, I don't know if you have heard about Tuskegee, right? Or the syphilis study that was done for untreated syphilis in the Negro male in the America, in period 1932 to 1972. So they actually had 400 males, and they were doing a syphilis study for untreated syphilis. So these people were not informed, and at the end of the study, more than 100 of them had actually died because of the deception that was involved. So they were not given all the information related to the study that the person was, or the researchers were actually doing. So you find that they would give them medication, and they would actually say it works, all right? and yet it is an ineffective method. Or they would do some diagnostic procedures and they actually say that it is for treatment, and yet it wasn't, right? And then there is one that I actually like, which is the Kioms, or well, I've not yet reached that part, but with the Belmont one, it summarizes ethical principles and guidelines for research that looks at three principles. You've got respect for people, beneficence, which means your research must not cause harm. Whatever research you're going to do must not cause harm, be it now or in the future. And then justice, right? Where you have to balance your risks and your benefits and to ensure that there is fair distribution and fair sharing of whatever burden is related to your study. Right? So we will then apply it when it comes to informed consent, assessment of our risks and our benefits, and selection of subjects to participate in our research. We also have the Council for International Organization of Medical Sciences, which have also further developed guidelines on how research should be done. So the research is, when they are developing these guidelines, they don't just end at talking about how you are going to be dealing with these human participants. There's also the part where they touch on fabrication, they talk about manipulation of data and all that, which you are also going to find as being relevant to your study, regardless of what specialization you are in. Right. So this one is an international non-governmental organization by the WHO and the UNESCO. So all they are doing there is they want to advance health, public health, by providing guidance on that health research and the policies, which will then include things related to ethics, maybe medical production, medical product development, and safety, right? So which might apply to the designers that we have, right? And then the last one, or the most current one, that also helps us in our thinking is the UNESCO one, which basically endorses the rules that govern respect, human rights, and fundamental freedom. And they recognize the interrelationship that is there between ethics, the human rights, especially in the fields of bioethics, where we are examining moral and ethical questions that arise in medicine or in life sciences or in the research in which we are developing something that will be of beneficial to the humans or to the animals and the plants. Okay. And then, as I also mentioned, I did have health sciences context, right? But you could apply it as well. So if you are now at that part of your proposal and you're talking about the ethics or the ethical considerations related to your study, you need to know the regulatory structure that is influencing your study, right? So the regulation, the way it is set about is that you have got an act and then you have got a regulation. These ones are compulsory, right? These ones are compulsory in whatever framework you're going to be performing under. You have to ensure that the acts and the regulations are compulsory, and then your codes of good practice, your guidelines, or maybe industry benchmarks or industry standards or standards in general, those ones are voluntary. So, and you can say, I'm voluntarily going to apply this one, right? And should anything happen, and it's an aspect which was in your benchmarking of industry, or maybe it is a guideline, right? There won't be that big of a fine or issues with it, right? But if it is something that contravenes the act, and the act is a framework and it tells you the stakeholders and the roles of the stakeholders when it comes to whatever is promulgated by that particular legislation, right? And then you have got the regulations. Now you take a regulation and the regulation now gives you the flesh on what it is that you're supposed to do when you are doing this particular thing there, right? So yes, we have got the Constitution being our umbrella, right? The main one. If we find that there are disputes between the act or maybe the guideline or maybe some regulations, then we then go and we look at the Constitution. So look at the Bill of Rights and what it says about people in the country and whatever it is that you're going to do that's supposed to be beneficial to the people or the citizens of that particular country. Right, so this is also just showing you the regulatory structure that you can have a look at and apply it in the field that you are in to see what is it or what applies in our context, right? For us in the health research, we really have to write everything related to ethical considerations because we cannot do a study before it actually serves for ethical clearance. I'm not sure about the engineering as well as the sciences. But for us, no study will actually go out there or be conducted, even if it was just you going to be sitting and interviewing these humans, right? And you say, okay, it's actually low risk. It still needs to go through that ethics committee, and they give you the ethical clearance for you to conduct the study. So we have the HDC, the Higher Degrees Committee, and then you have got the research ethics that then gives you the final clearance for your study to actually proceed. So I'm not sure in the engineering, can you actually just have it serving at the Higher Degrees Committee where your title is registered and so forth, and then you then proceed with your study? I'm not sure there, right? So this takes us to the topic on the ethics on research ethics committee. I've been telling you that in the health sciences we have got a committee which has been established, and it's established as a result of a national act as well, right? So that they can actually review research proposals in the field to ensure that they are ethical and they protect the rights and the well-being of the research participants. Yes, in the health sciences, we are dealing with human participants, and our ethics committee actually has to review each and every proposal that is sent there, that is developed in each of the specializations in the faculty. These committees are actually independent in terms of how they function, right? Independent of a research sponsor of a funder, because if they were really dependent on the sponsors, then they would have bias towards enriching and making sure that the sponsors and the funders actually get their purpose for having this study actually being done, right? And they are crucial in maintaining the ethical standards, and they review the methods that have been proposed for the research to say, this is how I'm going to do my study. These are my participants, or these are my subjects. This is how I'm selecting. And then they check the ethics related to how you are proposing that you're going to be doing your study. So now when it comes to ethics, if I can hear from the engineers or the sciences, do you have a portion in your proposal that says ethics, that says research ethics? And that portion of your proposal, what does it actually want you to deal with? What does it want you to talk about? And someone actually said that there is ethical clearance. So I'm also assuming that there is a rec of some sort for the faculty of engineering or for the faculty of science. Is that what is there? Do you guys also have a research ethics committee that reviews your proposals?
Yes.
Okay, so in your proposal, you also have got ethical considerations as a section. Under that section, what is it that you talk about, say in engineering or in the sciences? On our side in the health, when it comes to that portion of the proposal where we have to talk about ethics, we have to address issues related to informed consent. We have to address issues related to privacy and confidentiality. We have to address the risk-benefit ratio. We also have to talk about gatekeeper permissions. So you have got gatekeepers who might actually be gatekeeping for you to get access to these participants that you actually want. So you need to address that as well. And we have got data management as an ethical principle that we also need to address as well. And we will check in terms of your methodology. What is your design and what method are you actually going to follow? And then what is your population? So population might not necessarily be these human participants. It might just be data, secondary data that you're going to be looking at or that you're going to be analyzing. So they would want you they would also want you to tell them how you actually are proposing to sample from this data that is available so that it is fair, all right? There is that fair selection of that from that population. Right. So they would also want to find out, and we would want you to mention the inclusion and the exclusion criteria. So your eligibility criteria for you to be eligible to participate in my study, or for this document to be eligible for us to actually analyze. This is the inclusion criteria that we are going to use, and this is the exclusion. So if you do not meet this criteria, you would not be part of the population from which we are going to sample from. So that is us from the health sciences side. I'm not sure from the engineering and the science side. In terms of ethics, what is it that you're talking about? Is it issues related to academic integrity? Is it issues related to the plagiarism? Is it those things that you're addressing? Okay, so
Yes.
okay, so I'm actually assuming that that's what you guys would actually address there, right? So you talk about how you're going to ensure academic integrity, right? How you're actually going to show that you are presenting the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth from your own study at the end of the day, all right? So this was just to show you the ethics committee and how it is structured, who actually serves on that research ethics committee, right? So this is a committee that you would find in the health sciences, and the representation of or the membership of that particular ethics committee. So in your own research ethics committee, because you guys under ethical considerations are talking about the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, that you're going to be honest about your research, and then that's the truth, and then the whole truth, that there is not going to be omission of any parts of the research findings, which might then constitute misconduct or violate other moral norms, and then nothing but the truth, which is the aspect of that statement, where you then demonstrate that there will not be any dishonesty that's going to be involved there. Like maybe in your findings, you try to puff up your results by adding irrelevant information or information that is misleading, or where you are actually overstating the significance of your findings after you've collected your data. So we have established that for the health sciences, these are things that we actually look at. And then for engineering and the built environment, it's really about ethical guidelines that are stemming from research as the pursuit of truth. Okay. So also with our ethics committee and any ethical committee that exists out there, the study that's going to be done has to be scientifically sound. So that review board has got the expertise to actually judge whether your study is scientifically sound. So they are going to look at the scientific design, your objectives, your literature review, your research design, and your sampling. If you're going to be sampling anything, your sample size, your data analysis plan, right? Any inclusion and exclusion criteria if it is involved, and any withdrawal criteria if people are allowed to withdraw, all right? So in ethics, you might ask yourself, okay, you know what? I'm a good person. So why do I need to worry about these research ethics that you're talking about? And to whom do I actually owe that truth that you're talking about? To whom do I actually owe it to, right? So in terms of you being a good person, when you're talking about ethics in research, we are not talking about bad people doing bad things, right? It's not about that. It could be about imperfect people doing imperfect things, and they would be doing those things for a variety of reasons. So it might be a socially acceptable practice that we then later deem to be wrong, like that example that I gave you of the melanoma and its transplantation into a fully healthy individual. It could be as a result of an accident, or taking shortcuts, or you have missed something, especially with new methods or some technology out there. Or it could be you can become involved in ethical violations through the wrongs of others. So that document which I showed you at the beginning, where the authors actually retracted their article, is because they were writing, and there should have been about 2 or 3 of them. And one of the authors, when then they saw what was then published, he's the one who then went there and told them that, no, this is falsified information. This is not what actually came out from the study, all right? So you could be involved in ethical violations through the wrongs of others. So you might also want to take that into consideration, especially when you then write your articles from the work that you have done for your master's or your PhD. But then sometimes you find that the right thing to do is just not clear, all right? That's when you might want to go back to your regulatory framework and see what it is actually saying in the context in which you actually want to do your study. Or it could be self-deception, all right? You wanting to deceive yourself, or any other psychological tendency that you might have. But then in the in the academic field, you also face professional pressures, all right? You have got the publish or perish culture. You'll see that when you write your master's dissertation, before you submit it for the university's higher degrees committee to say, yes, you can now graduate, they will then expect you to write an article, one article. It doesn't necessarily have to be published, but there should be a sample which is ready for publication. And then for the PhDs, we will then expect you to be publishing two or more articles. But for us to really grant you that degree, you should have submitted those articles. And then this is a PhD, which we know is normal, right? Then, but they are PhDs that are PhDs purely by publication, right? So there could be some pressures that are there, or somebody wanting to keep up with their peers, somebody wanting to secure a grant with the proposal that you're writing. You might actually find out that there is a grant for which you can send out your proposal, and you want to secure a grant, and then you find yourself involved in some ethical violation in how you are presenting your work, or even the research that you have already conducted has got findings, and you know that they want such results, and then you decide to fabricate or manipulate the data so that it meets the criteria that the funder or the grantor is actually looking at, all right? Or you might be that person who wants to be first to discover something, all right? You want to be somebody who wants to be the first one to discover something. So all of these consist of ethical violations. And ethics is really not just about you being a bad person doing a bad thing. You might actually find yourself involved because of the actions of the others. And then the other question that I have there is, to whom do I owe this truth? The truth that you were talking about. Who do I owe it? And you owe it to the public, right? For its funding support. You might say, okay, I'm paying the fees and I'm doing all this, but there is also the public that is playing a role in terms of the infrastructural support that is there for you to be able to conduct that master's study. There is the individual research participants, or the people, or where we deal with human participants, and you owe them the truth out of respect for their autonomy. And it could be colleagues and collaborators that you actually owe the truth to, because their research may be based on your own research. Funding institutions, you owe them the truth as well, because you have to give them, or they gave you the resources for you to do the study, or some research institutions or the university itself for the resources also. And also because of the reputation that can be affected by what you're going to do as a student. Hence, us wanting to give you clearance to say, yes, we are happy that you can do this study and it will not cause any reputational damage to the university. So many of these obligations, you see that they stem from that nature of us pursuing the truth and knowledge. So then this then tells us, or this gives us the moral foundations of research. We want to do good for humans, animals, the planet, the future, all these people that we owe our truth to, and our duty to respect individuals, our possible duties towards animals, and our obligations to society. So these ones, like we say, or these various obligations derive from the foundations, right? And they can be in tension with one another, where you find that you are now in an ethical dilemma. So you have got two devils and you have to choose a better devil. When it comes to research, that might be something that you might end up finding. So some areas of research ethics that will probably apply to the engineering students, and not just the engineering students. I'm saying to the engineering students because with the health sciences, we then have, or with the health sciences and the sciences, we then have the plants, we then have the animals, we then have the humans to also consider in addition to this. So we have already mentioned about the research misconduct, falsification, fabrication, plagiarism, which is something that you've already said, right? The academic integrity in terms of collaboration issues, so authorship, data ownership, and management. So when you get to your ethical considerations aspect of your proposals, this is something that you might also want to address, to say, my study is actually ethically sound. And I am actually saying, I will not do these things. And I've put them in my proposal for the Research Ethics Committee to actually say, yes, we are happy and it can go ahead, right? Peer review, where I was saying you might be reviewing something and then you get to find out that there is a pointer there that will help you in the discovery that you are thinking you are getting to, right? So how do you handle such information if you were reviewing an article like that or a document like that? And then conflicts of interests, right? There shouldn't be any conflict of interest. And when whatever you are going to do in the study, you're also going to have to reveal if there are any conflicts of interest. So, which is closely related to the funding sources, where you might find that you are being funded by this organization that wants a certain result, right? And then you are doing this study and you have to be ethically or morally upright, and yet you also need to fulfill the requirements of that funding source. And then, of course, we have got animal subject research and human subject research, which you also need to consider, right? So the typical research that you're going to find, which involves ethical risk, especially if you're dealing with humans or if you're dealing with animals, right? We have got vulnerable groups, such as children and young people, or those with learning disabilities or special needs. So if you can categorize whatever you're going to be looking at in your research as being vulnerable, and vulnerable in this case, looking at different factors that will tell you that this is vulnerable. And we are looking at things like capacity, we are looking at things like free power, all right? Or maybe there is some policy or some documents or guidelines that are out there that's right about these vulnerable groups. And that protection that is being offered by these policies and these procedures actually make them vulnerable, or it shows you that they are vulnerable. And if we didn't have such policies or guidelines, these people would suffer consequences of being abused, right? Or yes. Or also where a person lacks that empowerment or they don't have power, right? The free power. And then topics related to which are sensitive, right? So sexual or illegal activities or people's experiences of abuse or violence, or subjects that can only be accessed via a gatekeeper. So if you have got a gatekeeper of some sort, so even if you're going to do, you were going to study someone's culture, and you're going to do that via archaeology, which is a science, right? There's still a gatekeeper that is there who has to give you permission to go and dig there, right? So if you find that there is such a study where you require access via a gatekeeper, you would need to write it and indicate it in your proposal and tell us how you propose to get this gatekeeper's permission. So even UJ, for instance, its higher degrees committee and its research ethics committee, those ones are gatekeepers. And if in your own department that you are working or in your own faculty that you are working, they also require you to send your proposal before it even goes out there to the bigger gatekeepers like your HDC or your REC, right? Within the department itself, we expect you to do something. Maybe present to the departmental's research committee your proposal or whatever you're proposing to study, and then they have to give you a yes or a no before it can even proceed to the higher degrees committee. And then if your study also has got an element of deception, such as covert observation, which is used without a participant's full or informed consent, if your research has got that component, then you know that it involves some ethical risk. And therefore, these ethical risks and possible violations need to be addressed in my proposals. Or any access to confidential records or information. If you're going to access records for analysis and your or your study involves that as well, then you know that there is some ethical considerations that you need to address in the proposal, or activities that are going to lead to stress, anxiety, or humiliation among your target groups, right? Then you know that it involves ethical risk and you need to actually address it before the university allows you to proceed with your study. So the ethical framework is actually bound by those principles. We have got 4 guiding principles, especially if we are dealing with humans, right? Or with animals. There's the respect for the person, their autonomy, their the beneficence, the non-maleficence, so something to do with do not harm, right? Or maximize the benefits, and justice, equity, and equality there. And then we have got those declarations and codes. In this case, the ones that I have, they are related to health. But you also find out that there are declarations and codes related to studies that you have done in the different faculties. So for instance, maybe there was a bridge that fell after it had been designed as a result of some study that was done. And now, after we found out how many people actually died, this is what we then actually ended up doing. And it gave birth to this declaration or to this code, right? Or we look at things to do with human rights or the guidelines that are out there. And of course, the guidelines that I have, they are for health-related research. So your KIOMS or the National Health Research Ethics Committee, from which our own REC has to report to. So when they actually say, yes, this proposal or this research, we are giving it a go-ahead, then the National Health Research Ethics Committee also gets to know about it. Or maybe the Department of Health Good Clinical Practice Guidelines, which also assist the students that are in that specialization on how they should proceed when it comes to ethics. So the principles that I talk about are those ones related to avoiding harm to the participants and therefore producing the benefits, or ensuring informed consent of the participants, or the respect of the privacy and the avoidance of deception. So when it's about avoiding harm, we are looking at principles like your beneficence and non-maleficence. We are looking at the risk-benefit ratio, privacy breach, and the contextual or the cultural specificity of privacy. So you might find that in one context, if people were to take pictures, it is seen as okay. But if you were in this context and you take pictures, then it will actually be frowned upon, right? Informed consent is about autonomy, and then the respect for persons. We are looking at privacy and confidentiality, so the principle of fidelity, and then avoiding the use of deception, right? So when you get gatekeeper permissions, for instance, you are also improving your proposal or your study in terms of avoidance of such. So, as I said, if you are in the engineering or you are in the science field, if you might deal with participants now in the study that you're doing, or they are going to be covered in the future, right? So it will then depend on what you're going to write there. It depends on the study itself. For you to be saying, I am addressing this principle of avoiding harm to participants, I'm thinking of the future. I am saying I'm reviewing this particular cement, for argument's sake, or I'm talking about the removal of asbestos later in the future. And as the removal of the asbestos must be done in this manner so that we do not actually end up harming the participants. So what I'm going to be talking about really is studies that have got humans as subjects, right? And this diagram just summarizes that. It's the respect for persons, the beneficence, the doing no harm. So your study might not necessarily also be working with humans or with humans, but the study that you're going to do must make sure that we do not harm, right? Or we maximize the benefits and minimize the harm to the person or the society as a whole, right? So you could apply it in the specialization that you are in. But informed consent or respect for persons, look at informed consent and the protection of vulnerable groups. So consent is actually an ongoing process, and vulnerability is also a contested concept, right? So if you're going to be defining that this is for a vulnerable group, then you have to also define what you really mean by vulnerability and how you actually got there for you to say they are indeed a vulnerable group. Beneficence, like I said, do no harm, maximize the benefits and minimize the harm. So your risk-benefit ratio. Justice, fair distribution of burden or the fair distribution of the benefits. So you're looking at undue exclusion of certain groups due to the sensitivity of the data, right? So if we're to avoid the harm to the participants, we are saying research is going to be considered harmful if it's going to cause that participant to be embarrassed, to be ridiculed, to be belittled, to be stressed, and so forth, right? That's harm that we consider to be, that's research that we say is going to cause harm to an individual. So if you then say that my research has got a potential to cause this particular harm, then you would need to tell us how you are going to minimize that particular harm or make sure that you reduce it to zero. But you know, with risk, you can never reduce it to zero. You can reduce it to a level that is as low as is reasonably practicable, right? But you need to be able to explain how you do go about it. But beneficence and non-maleficence there is about protection from harm or doing no harm. So we're talking about maximizing the potential benefits and protecting against the harm and securing the well-being, or non-maleficence, which is about not doing the harm, looking at things like negligence or obligation or obligations. So now if you think of that construction incident that happened in George, right? If it comes to that principle. So we are saying there was a proposal and there was someone who actually designed and said this building should look like this and it should build in this manner. These are the materials that you would need, especially if you are on this floor, you would need material which is of this particular integrity or something, right? And then avoiding harm also looks at justice, the fairness of it. And applied to research, you have to consider whether those that are taking the risk are likely to benefit from the findings of the study, and is it justifiable that the risks that are taken by these individuals, if they are unlikely to benefit from participating. That is if you are going to be dealing with the human participants, right? So you ask yourself that question, but there has to be fair distribution of burden or benefits. So you might be designing something and you say, I'm designing it for this particular context. And then we ask you, why are you not doing it at this one? And why did you not do it here? Why did you choose this one particularly. That's why even when you're writing your proposal, you don't just say this was my design. You also need to justify why you are following that particular design. Or when you write about your research setting, you are going to describe the research setting, and then you also need to justify why you decided to do it in this particular setting. Okay. So beyond avoiding harm, really, we are looking at things like research which is going to provide positive benefits, like adding to the human knowledge, yielding accurate and valid results, and providing feedback to the respondents if it's possible to do so, or to promote greater self-understanding. So yes, we might say, okay, you're talking about human participants mostly, right? But you're also going to be writing or producing documents. And these documents need to be protected, right? So that they don't fall into the wrong hands. We are talking about intellectual property as well. So once you have written your proposal, you've done your dissertation, you are done, you write an article, who does it belong to at the end of the day, right? Things like that. And if, as you're collecting your data, where are you keeping it? How are you managing this data that you're collecting? So that information is also quite important. And then the respect for persons looks at informed consent and protection of vulnerable groups. So in terms of informed consent, if you're going to be dealing with humans, you would need to make sure that you provide the information on the aims, who is undertaking it, the kind of information that is being sought, and how much of the participants' time is required. But let's say you also need a gatekeeper permission for a certain setting where you want to get some information. You might also need to get this informed consent. And to get that consent, it means you have to provide the information in its entirety about your own study, all right? And when we are dealing with human participants in the health research, we have to also to make sure that the participation that happens in the study is voluntary. That's responding to all the questions. Let's say you had a survey, it's a questionnaire that you're asking people out there. So you want to design some extractor that makes whatever, or that some machine that's going to make the outputs from the mines that actually dig. So they dig and then they put this soil there. And yet this soil contains something which is harmful to the community surrounding that mine. So you would need some people to tell you about it so that you then be able to design something that's going to meet or exceed the expectations of those stakeholders, all right? Who will access your data once it is collected, how anonymous the respondents are going to be, and how we are going to preserve that anonymity, and who should it be returned to and by when. And if there is an individual who wants to complain about how a researcher has done something, who do they actually contact to inform them about that, right? Or if they note some violation of some sort in how the data is being collected or how the research is being conducted. In that information letter, that's going to lead to someone signing that informed consent. In the information letter, you would have to capture that information. So the good thing about UJ is UJ already has got these templates. So all you need to do is to find a relevant template that works for you, for your study, and then you input your relevant information on that template. And then before it even goes out there to the gatekeeper, the ethical clearance here at UJ as a gatekeeper, they also want to see an example of a letter that you'd write, for instance, to the chief in the community, right? A letter that you'd write to the Department of Education or to the Department of Science because you want to access a certain lab there that people are using. Right, so they would want to see an example of that as an annexure before they can say, correct here, do this here, do that there, and include this in that particular document. And then also when we talk about respect of persons, we talk about deception, which is any intentional choice by the researcher to create in the participant a deliberate misperception. So you might say, okay, but you said I need to have informed consent. And for me to get informed consent, I need to to give full disclosure. So there are certain studies that I might want to do that would require deception, because if I tell the people that there is this, right, or give them full disclosure, then they will act in a certain manner. They will act in a certain manner, and then I will not get the results that I require. So these are then your threats to the internal validity of your study. So deception looks at an intentional choice to deliberately give them wrong information, or you keep some information to yourself and you do not give full information. So it is part of a research design when the experiment involves convincing your participants to believe something that is not in fact true about what they are thinking. So a silly example would be, let's say you want to do a study, you want to find out how a person would feel if after reading a Facebook post. So they read a Facebook post and they see the reactions of the people there, all right? And then they think that the reactions are coming from the different people that are responding to that post that you posted there. So maybe you decided to take a picture, you're looking so good, and then they put a picture there, and then people say nasty things about that particular picture. So you might give it to the people and you want to observe how they react to the responses on that Facebook post, right? And then you do not tell them that, you know what, these responses that you are going through are responses which have been written by the researcher themselves, or the researchers themselves are the ones that actually wrote those, or some artificial intelligence app actually did those the responses to the picture that was posted there. It's because if you were to then tell them, the way that they would look at the responses will be different than if they didn't know and they were looking at it as if it was real, right? So deception is, we employ it because we want to reduce biasness, right? And then the conditions, in research, we actually say the use of deception is not allowed, except if you were to do it under two conditions. And one of the conditions is that there is no alternative way in which you could conduct this study at all, right? And then you can also show the ethical principles after the data has been collected. So the data has been collected. Are you going to then give the full disclosure of the study and then allow the people that were deceived as part of the study to actually withdraw their responses, so to speak, all right? So you have to think about that. But in general, deception in any research is not allowed, right? But there was a study that was conducted in the pharmacy there, where they wanted to see, you see, when you get a prescription from your doctor, it says this is the medication that you want, right? So it gives you this medication. And then when you go there, they will tell you that there is this medication, and maybe you find that it is 45 rand. And then there is also this medication, similar contents, right, in terms of the active ingredient, but it's going to cost you, say, 150 rand. So which one do pharmacists actually give to the people that actually come with a prescription, right? Because they also have to think about the business and the bottom line as well. So would they sell a 45 rand one versus a 120 rand one, right? So in that study, you would not want to tell the pharmacist that that is what you want to be doing. But once you've collected the results, you also need to give this pharmacist the opportunity to say, I withdraw the results from the study, all right? And then the last one will be on the protection of the vulnerable groups, which I said we are people that we consider to be particularly susceptible to coercion or to undue influence in a research setting, or they may be incapable of understanding what it means to participate in research, or who may not understand what constitutes informed consent. And we have got these groups that we consider to be vulnerable. We have got children, we have got pregnant women, we have got prisoners, we've got the economically disadvantaged, we have got racial and ethnic minorities, or the very sick or the disabled. So if your study is going to be involving these ones, there are certain additional protection measures that you need to talk about when it comes to the ethics involving that particular group. So if it was your economically disadvantaged people that you are doing something in, they are actually participating in your research because of financial incentives, which you are promising, and therefore it can lead to undue influence. Or if it is about prisoners, right? It's about their ability to give that voluntary consent, right? Which is compromised by their incarceration. So it's about the free power associated with such a group, right? So privacy and confidentiality is about the data. I think I've been talking. Maybe I should give you guys an opportunity to ask any questions, but we are almost through. Any questions? No questions. Any questions? I hear someone who's trying to talk. No questions? Okay, so privacy and confidentiality. If you were dealing with data, for instance, and we are also dealing with people, and you have got information about, say, a company, its people, and what they do there, right? Such that if you were to write that information or publish that information, you would actually breach their privacy, or we get to know, even if you had not given us the name of that company, because of that data that you have given us, we are able to identify it. So when we're talking about privacy and confidentiality, the ethical foundations of that is about autonomy, non-maleficence, and justice. So there are legal considerations that we look at when we are dealing with privacy and confidentiality, and we are looking at the acts. So one of the acts that you know, which is out there now, or the buzzword, is the POPI Act. So if you then go into the POPI Act, which is about protection of personal information, right? Or protection of, what is it called again? Promotion of access to information, right? The PAIA one. So you could look at those in terms of the legal considerations. And they would also specify for you, if you're going to be using secondary, if your use of data is secondary in nature, if you're going to be capturing this information that you're going to write, this is how you would do it. And in terms of what do we mean about de-identifying the data? So you might be collecting data and you have that information, but before you actually publish or do anything with that data, you need to de-identify it. But in your de-identification, you mustn't then be losing the links. You should be able to know that this one who was originally Samuel Ndlovu, now I have given a code name, or I have given a code number, and I can link this to their results, right? And then it's about the breaching of privacy. How do you keep data private? And then now, because we have got third parties like our online platforms, our translators, our coders, our transcribers, or even our observers. So in terms of translators, you might have a survey and you want it and it's in English, and you want to change it into a language for the setting in which you are going to conduct the study. Or maybe you interview people and then you have got a person that's going to transcribe your collected interview scripts. And then you have got an independent coder who's also going to code to come up with the themes. So you might also want to specify how you are going to ensure the privacy and confidentiality of the data which has been collected when you share the data with your coder, or when you send the interview itself, all right, the raw recorded interview itself to a transcriber. And then we have got online platforms as well, right? So if you were to start your survey and you do it on Google Forms, or maybe you use Redcap, right? And then what is there that's going to protect the privacy and confidentiality of the people that complete the survey there, right? So these platforms would then need to show you how, or they have some policies and procedures in place, because once they complete, you might actually take the data, but they also remain with that backup data. So how are they going to do? What are they going to do? So what policies do they have, right? Or what do they want you to, sign to show that at the end of the day, we would treat this data in this manner so that it is not accessible to people that are not supposed to have access to it. Okay, so this is where I end for today. And the silence itself shows me that it was more leaning towards health research and therefore not towards engineering and the sciences. But like I said, these ones could basically apply to you maybe in the future. But if you're going to write about your ethical considerations related to your study, look at your study topic and then see whether what you're supposed to address there is issues related to plagiarism, issues related to academic integrity, issues related to the scientific design, issues related to the scientific validity or social value of your study, and so forth. All right, I don't know if you've got any questions. Any questions? Any questions?
Yeah, not at all.
Okay.
We just like information was so informative, and I didn't know that is this concept or this chapter or part in the methodology. You know, it's really, really, really important.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Any other questions?
If I may ask Mrs. Muktava,
Yes.
in case now a student is found out maybe there is unethical in between their studies, usually what actions are taken from the university, and then goes to court, or the student gets expelled from or given another chance to redo the study?
Actually, what then happens, and they find out, then it will go through our internal processes. So your HDC that approved your study and the clearances that you actually got, and then you will then get academic exclusion. All right, they'll give you academic exclusion. And the academic exclusion actually is the same for your plagiarism. So if you are at master's level, PhD level, then we'll give you 2 years to go out there and then maybe reapply and do a new study altogether, right? But usually because you've actually shown us that you are that at-risk student, it becomes quite difficult for them to accept you into the system. So and that thing will also go on your academic profile. Sometimes you would then apply at another university and they would then also want to find out what actually happened in your academic life. And that thing also comes up to haunt you. For us in the health sciences, we also then would report you to the professional body that you are supposed to be registered with. So if it was the medical professions, then we would report you to the Health Professions Council, and we report you to the Nursing Council, and then they also punish you from their own side there. But yes, so usually when there has been, what term do they use it? Let's say you find out, you have to inform the ethical people, the people that cleared you. You have to inform them about this violation that you have. And maybe it happened by accident, but it has to be. And then it is actually recorded. I'm forgetting what they call it, but there's a name that they give it, where a student actually finds out that there's been this violation and then it has got ethical implications, and then they go back and they report it to the REC, and then the REC actually notes it down. So these RECs are part of a bigger national research ethics committee. So whatever is happening here at the university with regards to ethics, they will also need to report it to that national REC as well.
Okay, thank you for that. It becomes a very serious issue now, because I'm thinking if maybe it was not something that is intentionally, it came out after maybe you thought you are done with your study and maybe the committee then decided against it. So it's kind of tricky.
Yeah, then they will not graduate you. So there was an issue which was mentioned where there was a student who plagiarized the whole PhD from a university in Auckland, New Zealand there. And the student is still embroiled in a court case, and it's now 8 years after, because the student is adamant that they did this research, but plagiarism softwares and everything is showing that they took that particular study. So now there's these implications to the academic integrity, because you then look at this student wrote a proposal, he had supervisors, he had all these reviewers that let it go through, and then we then find it. Then we then find out that it is plagiarized. So even at proposal level, when you write your proposal now, before it serves at these committees, they would want you to do a plagiarism, to check for similarity, right? So it has to be checked on all the databases that are out there. And there's a document that we complete here at UJ, you as the student, and you sign on it to say it has been run and therefore it has got this particular similarity index. I don't know in your engineering space or in your science space what similarity index they expect for a PhD proposal or for a master's proposal, for them to say, yes, it can serve at any of these gatekeepers that are within the university before clearance is issued out. So yeah, this is also something that you might also want to find out. What documents do I need to complete and sign after I have run through my proposal through that plagiarism software? Sometimes you find that with your plagiarism software, do you know that you can manipulate it to give you a certain percentage in terms of similarity, right? Hence us wanting you to complete that form and sign it to say, yes, this is indeed the similarity which is there. So also, again, we might say run it yourself as a student, but on our side, especially the supervisor, they would also run it without any of the manipulations that students can actually do out there and see whether it meets the criteria set by the department or by the faculty. So make sure that you are referencing your work correctly and you're acknowledging the information that you have received from somewhere, right? The information, the opinions, the images that you take pictures of or you include in your work, you also need to acknowledge where you are getting them from, right? Because sometimes you might be used to just seeing this image and then you copy and you paste it in your work, yet it has got some copyright issues associated with it, whereby the university might need to ask for permission to use that particular image from the responsible people. Yes. So it's some such things that you might come across.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And I think now answered. Anyone who have a question from our participants, you have a chance to ask your question.
Any questions? No questions.
I think we do not have any question from questions from the chats and Q&A. So, and I think that was very informative. Thank you, Mrs. Mutava, for taking your time. Thank you for facilitating this workshop. And to our participants, thank you so much. I've shared the link for the evaluation. Please do fill it out during your spare time. We will really appreciate your feedback or your thoughts towards the workshop. In the absence of questions, we will then end this section. The recording will be available to your module community as well as the presentation that were being used today. Once again, thank you, Mrs. Mutava, for taking your time. We really appreciate your effort, and to all our participants, thank you.
Thank you, Nkosi. Bye-bye.
Bye.